Good morning. My name is Sara Forrest. It's my pleasure to be your worship associate this morning. When I was 20, or in my 20s, my cousin took me backcountry skiing in the mountains of Montana, the Bitterroot Mountains. We climbed to the top of a clear-cut area with the goal of skiing down through some beautiful powder, and she went first, and as most older cousins usually do, was effortless, skilled, graceful, so cool. And then I went next, and suffice to say, I had a different journey down the mountain, and one that included lots of falling, so much falling, and getting up again, brief gliding, but mostly falling. I was absolutely exhausted, frustrated, humiliated, and then about 3/4 of the way down, my cousin, who of course was already at the bottom, shouted up 3 magic words to me. She said, "Sara, look up." And I did. And everything changed. For a moment, I was able to just take in the immensity of where I was. And suddenly that fatigue felt like the gift of a grand adventure. And those imprints of my face at various points down the mountain were no longer humiliating, but a sign of humility, just the simple result of being utterly trounced by a magnificent something that was so much bigger than myself. A privilege, really. There have been moments when I've been able to look up and take in this aging journey that we're all on. Sometimes the result is hilarity, like when my best friend and I, sitting on a park bench, looked at each other and finally realized that our hair really is truly turning gray. It's happening. Sometimes the result is a deep and profound tenderness. And when I look at my husband and I see all the smile lines around his eye or the grain in his beard, in those times I can feel how we were just kids when we met. And all those lines become a reminder of how long we've been loving each other. And I know that in the future, that moment of looking up might result in profound fear in the face of so much unknown. And I can only hope I'll have the love around me to help me face it. Given this opportunity to reimagine aging, what struck me most is the way our bodies mark and track the time we have spent here. I imagine aging as a bell of awareness, a signifier of time spent on this earth in this time-bound experience of consciousness. When we can look up and take in this process of aging as a whole, we have this magic moment where we are simultaneously aware of our smallness, right alongside the immense miracle that it is just to be here, a part of something beyond what we can even possibly imagine. I wish for these moments of awe and wonder for everyone along the way. I think it helps us take the hard things in stride. And I hope, if you think of it in the weeks ahead, that you're all able to take a moment to look up.
Our reading today is a poem that many of you probably know. It is Warning by Jenny Joseph. And Barb Pitney brought in a prop for me today. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat that doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I am tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick the flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. You can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at a go, or only bread and pickle for a week, and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. But now we must have clothes that keep us dry and pay our rent and not swear in the street and set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I'm old and start to wear purple. The Barbie movie, which came out recently to much critical acclaim, begins with candy-colored scenes of a broad diversity of Barbies, all living in various Technicolor dream houses. There are Barbies of different races and abilities and sizes. They are Supreme Court justices and a president and doctors and construction workers. But noticeably, there are no old Barbies. In fact, the problems in Barbie Land begin when stereotypical Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, in the midst of a choreographed dance sequence with all of her friends, turns and says, "Do you guys ever think about dying?" The other Barbies tell stereotypical Barbie, the next day other signs emerge of her existential crisis. Played for humor, these include bad breath, a tiny bit of cellulite, and horror of horrors, flat feet. The other Barbies tell stereotypical Barbie that she needs to go talk to Weird Barbie, the doll who got played with too hard and has a bad haircut and Sharpie on her face. She convinces Barbie that she needs to go to the real world to figure out why things are going sideways. Adventures, feminism, patriarchy, and silliness abound. But there is one small scene where Barbie is alone at a bus stop, seated next to an old woman. Barbie, who has probably never seen anyone over 35, tops, looks at this woman, her wrinkle-lined face and silver hair and middle-aged spread, and really sees her. "You're so beautiful," she says. "I know it," says the woman. According to director Greta Gerwig, this scene was almost cut from the film. The producers told her it didn't advance the plot in any meaningful way. "But if you don't have that scene in there, I don't even know what the movie is about," she said, and the scene stayed. It's not surprising that there are no old Barbies. Barbie was designed as the first teenaged fashion doll in a world that until then had only seen baby dolls. Now, instead of playing at mothers, little girls, and little kids in general could start playing at being teenagers, and eventually Barbie really worked at teaching little girls that they could be anything. They could be doctors or vets or gymnasts or lawyers or Supreme Court justices or the president. Now, unfortunately, it seems to be a fact of life that young children and teenagers sometimes can't imagine that older people have the same thoughts and dreams and ideas that teenagers have. And for a lot of them, they certainly can't imagine people their parents' age or older having romantic or sexual lives. I've never forgotten a Stone Soup comic strip from 20 years ago. A 13-year-old girl who has learned where babies come from asks her mother how in the world older people can have babies. "They certainly can't find one another attractive," she says. The television franchise The Bachelor, where a couple of dozen men or women compete to marry a single man or woman on national TV, is realizing that older adults do in fact have romantic and sexual lives. This week, Jerry Turner, who is a 72-year-old widower, is starring on The Golden Bachelor, where 24 women ages 60 to 75 are competing to find love. The showrunners set a broader cultural shift toward embracing rather than hiding aging actually helped pave the way for the show. The women of the Golden Bachelor brought into the mansion a certain self-assured humor that comes with age, the show's producer said. When we cast for the other shows, some of the younger kids came to us and they have a feeling that they need to present a version of themselves that we want to see, said the showrunner. These women were just themselves from the jump. And in fact, apparently, one of the more amusing things that they talked about in the house was whether it was Edith's guacamole or Sharon's meatballs that gave everyone gas. And it is not gas, but the idea of being yourself from the jump that is what I really want to talk about today. The idea that there are some distinct benefits to aging, as well as some pain. One of the benefits, as noted in the Barbie movie, is a lack of worry about appearance, which is something that young people, especially young femme people, tend to worry about a lot. We are told that we have to be slender, but not too slender, and conventionally attractive in order to find a partner, and often even to find good employment. Femme people should wear makeup, but not look like they're wearing too much makeup. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on young people, especially with social media, to be doing it right. And as we age, most of us, those of us who don't rely on our appearance for our livelihoods, relax somewhat about those expectations. In a way, COVID helped with this a little bit. My mom really thought that she would color her hair until she died, but it grew out during COVID, and she decided that the gray was okay, something that she had been fighting for 40 years. There is a certain invisibility that comes with middle age, especially for women. In a world so concerned with appearance, it can feel very strange to feel like you aren't really seen anymore. But there's a freedom to that as well. The freedom of being let loose from some of society's expectations. Mara Melandri wrote in a tiny love story in the New York Times, "The American woman sitting with us at a table in Capri did not see the smirks of the impeccably dressed Italians at the next table. She was middle-aged, frumpy, a little overweight. They were in their mid-30s and slim. She said that hardly any of the passengers on her cruise ship came to Capri for the day." More smirks. "I don't want to miss one museum, one piazza, one fountain, one enchanting place," she said. "I want to experience it all. Otherwise, what's the point?" The Italian smiled warmly. No more smirks. Many older people are able to retire, or at least work less compulsively. There is a certain privilege in aging if one has freedom and means. You can join a book club, or 4. Yes, I'm looking at you, Katie. Or take up pickleball. But it doesn't have to be hobbies or free time that older people enjoy. David Brooks wrote an article in The Atlantic called "The New Old Age." Partially, it's an article about folks in their 50s and 60s who have lots of money and had high-powered careers and want to reinvent themselves for the next chapter. But there is a lot of advice that is also relevant to most anyone. The first thing that Brooks noted is that the concept of adolescence only came into being in the first half of the 20th century. And he notes that now another new phase is developing between the career phase and senescence. He said people are living longer lives. If you are 60 right now, you have a roughly 50% chance of reaching 90. In other words, if you retire in your early to mid-60s, you can expect to have another 20 years before your mind and body begin their steepest decline. And for many folks who retire after satisfying careers, retirement can leave them feeling pretty empty, outside the information flow, not useful, and thrown back into Eric Eckerson's developmental crises. Eric Eckerson noted people with either achieve generativity, a way of serving others, or sink into stagnation. At an age when you think they'd be old enough to know the answers, they find themselves thrown back into some fundamental questions. Who am I? What is my purpose? What do I really want? Do I matter? Brooks notes, since the dawn of the modern age, people have been complaining about the hollowness of the rat race, but nobody ever does anything about it. If these post-professional programs can help older people figure out what a fulfilling life looks like when work and career are no longer at the center, then maybe they'll have some lessons for the rest of us. The emergence of a cohort of people who are still vital and energetic, but who are living by a different set of values, creating a different conception of the good life, might help the broader culture achieve a values reset. I think he's exactly right, and I see it a lot around this place. Well, we have amazing volunteers and church leadership at every age. I think it is true that a big chunk of the work gets done by folks who are in their 60s and 70s. Maybe they're still working, maybe they're not, but they are less tied down by raising children and working 50 hours a week. And so they have time to feed the hungry or clean up the church. They are finding meaning and purpose in working together on something that matters to them. And yet there is also a great deal of loss that happens with aging. I took a pastoral care class early on in seminary, and we did an exercise that I have never forgotten. We were instructed to tear a piece of paper into 12 pieces and then write down 4 people we loved, 4 things we liked to do, and 4 senses. Then we had to turn them all over, and we had to take away 4 pieces of paper. You don't have those things anymore. And then 2 more. And then 2 more. It was heartbreaking. And I found myself fighting to keep my children, who were then 7 and 4. I lost reading. I lost walking in the woods. I lost cooking. I lost people that I loved. And for many people, this really is aging. My mom died last October at 80, and she had lost all of those things. Though fortunately, she'd kept her husband and both of her daughters. My dad took excellent care of my mom at home because that's what they both wanted. And it worked, but it worked because Dad outlived Mom. If it had worked out the other way, Mom would have had to go into care immediately. She couldn't take care of herself, and it was clear that she didn't want to live with my sister or I. I love you, but I don't want to live with you. You have all those animals. Aging is hard. And it's a gift. If we don't lose something along the way, we really haven't lived long enough. Over the next month, we'll talk more about aging, the gifts and the losses. We'll talk about dementia, about starting anew, and about grief. But what we won't do is hide from it. It didn't work out well for Siddhartha Buddha, and it won't work out for us. It's important to make plans. It's important to figure out what we want at the end of life and to figure out how we want to get there. To take care of our bodies and our minds, and especially to feed and nurture our networks of support and care, our friends and our family. Dorothy N. Monroe wrote in her poem, "The Cost," "Death is not too high a price to pay for having lived. Mountains never die. nor do the seas or rocks or endless sky. Through eternal, countless centuries of time, they stay eternal, deathless. Yet they never live. If choice were there, I would not hesitate to choose mortality. Whatever fate demanded in return for life, I'd give. Fate demands loss. Aging is full of losses, big and small, personal and interpersonal. But as my dad always says, it's a damn sight better than the alternative. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.